Welcome to Out of the Fold. This episode is the second part of 3 about Claire. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, please do so before listening to this one. I wanted to go back to your school experience
Yeah.
a little bit. You talked a lot about the purity culture and everything, and how that came to a head with Mark and with Sarah and with everything else. But it sounds like there was a lot more going on in that school that was about fear than there was about actual the positive things about faith and about believing in it was about fear of hell and fear of sin and fear of sex, and wasn't nearly as much about love of God and love of Jesus. Is that correct?
Definitely. The belief that I was taught growing up is that, once saved, always saved, right? You truly ask Jesus into your heart, and, you're sealed for all eternity to his kingdom. You can't lose your salvation, but a good Christian should be showing the fruit of the Spirit in their lives. And we were taught to feel guilty at every turn because we weren't doing it enough. We were to have private devotions every single night, and if we didn't, we were taught to feel guilty about that. Jesus died for you, and you can't even give him 15 minutes, with him and his word before you go to bed. I remember our youth group leaders gave us this sermon one night about a woman who never missed devotions a day in her life, except for the day when she had, some kind of invasive surgery at the hospital. And then even then the next night, she was insisting that somebody go home and get her Bible and bring it to her hospital room, and why weren't we like that? Definitely all about the guilt. I held no fear that I was going to hell, because I knew I was saved. But we were taught that every human is born with an intrinsic sinful inclination. You've heard the idea of original sin, that because Adam and Eve brought sin into the world, that each subsequent person born is born with this indelible stain of sin in their heart, and a natural inclination to do wrong against God. I remember at my brother's house one day watching his 2-year-old son, and his son was just toddling around the house, and he wasn't allowed to get up onto the fireplace, but, we caught him trying to climb up onto the bricks, and, he was giggling, he knew he was doing something he wasn't supposed to, ha ha ha. And my mom turned to me and just had this really grieved look on her face, and she said, "It is so heartbreaking to see the natural sin in his little 2-year-old heart. It's really heartbreaking to see his sin nature coming out at such a young age." I thought, my God, he's only 2.
Right.
He doesn't.
He's
He
being
doesn't
a
understand
kid.
sin. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, and there's a really great old hymn that we sang a lot, and there's a verse of it that goes, "Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to leave thee, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, take and seal it, take it for thy courts above." And the idea, again, just hammered into you that you are a bad person. You, left to your own devices, are going to do the wrong thing. You are sinful. You are broken. You are inherently twisted. And the only thing, the only prescription is Jesus. On the kids' side, we listened to a lot of, Christian pop music and stuff growing up. And one of my favorites was a Christian artist called Jackie Velasquez. Beautiful voice, by the way, really talented young woman. But she had this really beautiful song that I loved. I learned to play it on the piano. It's called Imagine Me Without You. And looking back on it, the lyrics are awful. And this is the kind of stuff that, my peers and I were listening to. And the lyrics go, imagine me without you. I'd be lost and so confused. I wouldn't last a day. I'd be afraid without you there to see me through. Imagine me without you. Lord, you know it's just impossible. Because of you, it's all brand new. My life is now worthwhile. Imagine me without you. And think about that. That's horrible. What a horrible thing to teach a kid, that their life is not worth anything until Jesus comes into their heart. And it did a number on me psychologically. I began struggling with low self-esteem and self-harm at a very, very young age. It's something I still struggle with even now. I'm in my 30s, and it's still something that I have to actively control in myself. But this idea that you are defined by your mistakes, that you have no power of your own to be a good person, it's a very defeatist attitude. Why should I try to be better? I can't be better. It's impossible for me to be better. Why should I try to be a better person?
Did you ever bring up your low self-esteem to your family or to anybody in the church? And did anybody have any advice, good or bad, that was relating and just in an effort to help you?
No, unfortunately. I was really young, and I thought that I deserved to be punished. I thought that by seeking help, I would be attempting to circumvent something that I deserved, but man, what a messed up thing when you've got a 12-year-old kid who's, hiding, bite and scratch marks on herself. When you've got a 16-year-old girl who doesn't have a car, but she's got a key on a ring that she uses to cut herself at the ankles where people won't see it. And I did get caught, and I did get sent to, quote unquote therapy. My mom sent me to a Christian therapist, but she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't sit me down and ask me about it. All I got was a lecture on why it was wrong. And then I got shipped off to a therapist who spent the entire time talking at me and refused to let me speak. So I had 2 sessions with that therapist, and then I had a miraculous recovery, quote unquote. Told my mom that Jesus and I had a really frank discussion about it, and I signed a paper with a Bible verse on it that promised I'd never do it again, and I went right back to it. But this time, I learned to clam up and to not talk about it.
I'm curious if you've if you've seen a therapist since then, and
yeah. I had a friend in high school who actually attended a few sessions with that same therapist, and her stories were exactly the same. This therapist was very condescending to her, treated her like a child. She's 16 years old, and the lady's asking her which stuffed animal she wants to hold today. It took me a couple tries, but I avoided therapy for a long time because I thought, it's just going to be more of the same. But actually, just this year, I started up therapy with a really wonderful doctor who actually, has a doctorate in psychology, went to med school for it, believes in cognitive behavioral therapy, and is actually, oh goodness, effective.
Yeah.
But I remember during my first sessions with her, she's sitting there asking me to describe, and keep in mind, I'm in my 30s as I'm talking to her. This is how deep of an impact this religious culture has had on me. that she's sitting there asking me, like, why are you doing these things to yourself? And I'm sitting there, tears streaming down my face, saying, I'm the worst person. I'm the worst possible person alive. And she just goes, are you worse than Hitler? And that just stopped me up. And she goes, have you ever killed 6 million people? And well, I guess no. But she herself is a believer in something I didn't know at the time. But she's given me a new perspective on the nature of God. That God isn't this patriarchal dictator who's got a tally mark of our mistakes. That God is something beyond our understanding. But would a loving God really want you to spend years of your life beating yourself up? Under her care, I've come to learn for the first time in my life that, I've made mistakes in my life, but I don't have to be defined by those mistakes. I am not inherently a bad person. That it's okay for me to, apologize if I do make a mistake, if I do hurt somebody. It's okay for me to apologize and to grow and to become a better person because of it, and to move on. I don't have to sit there stewing, in my own spiritual filth, so to speak, waiting for somebody to come and clean me up. I can clean myself up. I have the right to say no to people. I have the right to assert what I want. I got to tell you, it's been kind of a journey. I didn't even realize I was doing this. I've been married to a really wonderful man for 6 years this year, and
congratulations.
Thank you. I couldn't be happier. He's a really, really wonderful person. But I noticed all throughout our marriage, I was terrified to make decisions around him. Where do you want to eat today? Oh, I don't care. You pick. No, you pick. I want to go where you want to go. No, I'm going to pick the wrong thing. You pick where we go to eat. Please don't make me choose. I'm going to choose the wrong thing. Realizing that I'm so afraid of making the wrong decision that I can't even choose where to go to eat on a date with my husband. I just had this revelation this month with my latest session with my therapist that sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. Really.
I've been so afraid of learning not to be aggressive, but to be assertive in what I want. And I've been so afraid that if I become assertive, that my husband won't like me anymore. Because we've been trained that women should be submissive and women should be meek and demure and should always defer in all things to the man. And that fear is so deeply rooted in me that it took 6 years into our marriage and months of therapy for me to come to the realization that, if I decide I want to go to, a Mexican restaurant, and my husband kind of wished that we would go to sushi, but he goes to Mexican with me anyway, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Did your realizations about being more assertive and that you can just apologize or you can clean yourself up when you make mistakes, did those realizations coincide with you beginning to question your faith, or did one come before the other?
No, really good question. And no, definitely. I've been questioning the faith for years. Actually, my move into Christian education, this was after the experience with Mark and his home church group. But my move into Christian education was actually a desperate attempt for me to reground myself in the Christian community, because I was having these doubts and I was afraid of what it meant. If I were to suddenly wake up and realize that, oh my God, I don't believe that I don't believe that gay people are evil and out to get us Christians, or, I don't believe that, a loving God would send people to hell. What does that mean for me if I suddenly start to acknowledge these things? So in a desperate attempt to get back to this mindset where I was comfortable because I knew the answers. And just a quick aside, I think that's the really appealing thing about, any religion, but especially this fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, is that we have the answers. People talk about, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? What's my purpose? We have those answers, and we can feel this smug sense of superiority. Oh, those poor other people, floundering and lost and wondering, if only they would come into the light and, know what we know. And I think that's the appeal. And so, wanting to get that sense of assuredness back is what led me to, pursue a path of becoming a Christian educator.
So basically, when you started to have doubts, you kind of went all in as much as possible to to try to just get the doubts gone. Yeah.
Mhm. And I was terrified of going back to church at the time, because I'd been trying out, after leaving Pawnee Baptist, I'd been trying out several different churches, but man, I couldn't trust any of them. How could I know who was lying about being the mouthpiece of God after my experience with Mark? How could I trust anybody who claimed spiritual authority? But I can trust myself. I'm smart. I've been a Bible scholar for 20 years at this point. I know what it says. I can find it out for myself, and hopefully can pursue that kind of career that would land me in an environment where I was with like-minded people. If I couldn't trust the teachers, I would become the teacher, essentially. So I, after breaking up with Mark, I went back to school. I had a degree in English, and I went back to school to pick up a teacher's license for secondary English education. And right after getting my teacher's license, I was accepted onto the staff at Eagleton Christian as the 9th and 10th grade English teacher. And I taught a few other courses here and there as well, but English was kind of my bread and butter. And I thought, this is it. This is perfect. It's a school very much like Pawnee Baptist. It was a Christian K through 12 academy that was very focused on academics. Very much like Pawnee Baptist. It was considered a college prep school, and most of its students graduated and went on to pursue higher education. And I thought, this is perfect. It's exactly the kind of place that will help me help others and also help me in return spiritually. Especially, so soon after, almost being locked into an abusive marriage, I knew that my religious upbringing had something to do with that. And I wanted to make sure that my students were equipped, not to just blindly accept everything that was shoveled with them. So, only to blindly accept most of the things that we shoveled with them, essentially. But my big thing that I wanted them to focus on was, why do you believe what you believe? And the idea is that, we're not just churning out, little Bible scholars who parrot back the right answers, but we're churning out little apologists who are able to, dig deep and find good, solid, logical evidence for what they believe. Which, I still stand by that. If you believe something, great, that's fine. Just don't say, I believe it because I feel it in my heart, or I believe it because my parents taught me, or whatever. If you hold a belief, know why you believe it. But my problem was that Eagleton didn't see it that way. Eagleton wanted their students to be good little obedient Christians. They wanted their students to learn the right answers, because in the minds of the school board and in the minds of the teachers, that was sufficient. Because we're in this little sheltered Christian bubble, and everybody speaks the Christian lingo, and that should be enough. And it's not. If you go into the real world, it's definitely not. But I was required to have a significant amount of biblical integration in what I taught. And I tried to make it life lessons. Say we're reading, say we're reading a certain novel in our literature portion. And, asking these questions about, the characters in the book did this. Do you think that this lines up with scripture? Why or why not? What should they have done instead? And how would that have affected the outcome? Trying to get them to not just parrot back the right answers, but to kind of synthesize their own information. But the problem was that a lot of the parents didn't take this too kindly. I remember I tried to kind of keep a tight lip on some of my own personal beliefs, just because I didn't want to rock the boat too much. At this point, I had kind of shaken off the mantle of young Earth creationism. I had been raised in that mindset that the Earth is only 4,000 to 6,000 years old, and everything in Genesis is literally true word for word. I had taken a couple science and geology courses in my undergrad, and kind of came to the realization, what? If I believe that evolution is true, maybe I'm not going to go to hell. Maybe believing in a 6,000-year-old Earth is not one of the prerequisites for salvation. But Eagleton very, very much taught young Earth creationism as scientific fact. And I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to lose my job. So, I kept my mouth very firmly shut about that. But little things started to slip out, just as I'm trying to teach these kids, to not just parrot back the right answers, but to take it in and think a little bit. I started to get a little bit of feedback here and there from parents. One kid came up to me and said, hey, my mom says she thinks you're a closet Methodist. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
But I had another run-in, unfortunately this one less funny, with a parent who took issue with the fact that that I was not teaching fundamentalist views enough. My first run-in with this particular parent was during the first week of school, during my third year of teaching. And every year during the first day of school, in all my classes, I said the same thing, which is, girls, I keep pads and tampons in my desk. If you need one, please come up. I will not make a big deal of it. I'm not going to ask questions. If you need one, just come up and I'll give you whatever you need. And I had a little 14-year-old girl in my freshman English class that year who went home and told her father, and Dad called the school frothing at the mouth and just furious, demanding that I be reprimanded for using filthy language like tampons in the classroom in front of his 14-year-old daughter.
I mean, so in an odd way, I mean, I get why they would want to leave some information about sexual intercourse out of things. Like, I don't agree with it, but I get why they wouldn't. But periods are just a totally natural thing, and I don't know if you've got any insight as to why that would have possibly been negative.
God, I have no idea. My only guess, and this is just a guess, but my only guess is that in the Bible, periods are something that are dirty and to be shunned and to be not talked about. In the Old Testament, if a woman had her period, she was unclean and not to be touched for like 2 weeks out of the month. So
I'm remembering that now. I am remembering that. You're right. You're right.
And not that I believe that this man believed that his daughter was literally unclean, but it leaves us with the stigma that periods are icky, and that women's bodies are dirty and filthy. And it may have also been the fact that this guy was watching his little girl become a little woman, and he couldn't handle that. So I can only speculate. I don't know for sure. But I did get formally reprimanded for that. And then the guy also demanded a parent-teacher conference because, I had mentioned during a lecture, we had gotten on the topic of, God, I don't even remember, but I think one of the characters in a story that we had read had consumed alcohol, and we got onto the morality of that. And I had mentioned, the Bible says don't get drunk. It never says don't drink. Obviously follow the laws and stuff, but Jesus made wine to bring to a party, and this dad demanded a one-on-one meeting with me where he accused me of telling his 14-year-old daughter that it was all right to go out and drink, and how dare I, and was I, did I drink? Had I ever drank before? Calling into question my character. And I got him off of that subject by talking about, future and upcoming lessons that I had planned for the rest of the year. And I was planning on spending the entire fourth quarter reading Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which, by the way, although Eagleton didn't necessarily have to follow the Indiana state standards for curriculum, almost every ninth grader in the state of Indiana reads Romeo and Juliet at like 14, 15 years old. Almost every single one does. So this is not something new or unexpected. Plus, it's part of, our cultural lexicon. Everybody knows the story of Romeo and Juliet. It's important.
Right.
So I had mentioned to him the upcoming plans for Romeo and Juliet. Oh, he was not happy about that. His idea was that Romeo and Juliet celebrates death, and death comes from the devil, and life comes from God, and we shouldn't be reading. And he even said, I haven't read it, but I know there's a ton of death in it, which there is, but that's not the point of the story. But he went to the school board and demanded that Romeo and Juliet be removed from the curriculum and replaced with the Chronicles of Narnia. And I spent at least an hour every week in a meeting with the superintendent for the rest of the year, where he pored over my notes and my materials for Romeo and Juliet, because he said the only way that we can keep Romeo and Juliet in your curriculum is to make sure that this guy is eventually okay with it. So,
why did that guy have so much pull?
I don't know. This wasn't his only kid in the school system, and the main source of income for private schools like this is tuition. It costs thousands of dollars a year to send your kid to a school like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're right.
That would be my guess. Is to not cater to this guy would be to take a huge hit in a revenue stream.
Yep. Makes sense.
The thing that got under my skin about this is not just that having to cater to this guy, but that the amount of quote unquote biblical integration went beyond what was necessary. You know, I had always tried to make biblical integration become a life lesson to encourage critical thought, but under instruction from the superintendent, I started having to just slap Christianity references onto the surface where it didn't even make sense. Like, you know, giving an initial introduction to the characters in the story. You know, this is Juliet. She's a young girl. Mary was also a young girl when she was chosen by God to become the mother of Jesus. You know, that kind of thing. It doesn't relate it sense, but you know, the more we can dangle the shiny keys, you know, the more we can distract from the evil depth contained within the story, so to speak. But the thing more than the parents and more than the superficial mouth service, I suppose, the thing that really got to me was just the way, I guess, the other faculty themselves. The biology teacher and I did a joint project every year for our freshmen. It was a paper on it was a persuasive, argumentative paper on young Earth creationism versus evolution. I always tried to make sure that the kids knew I don't care which one you support. I genuinely don't. The only thing I care about is, can you back it up with, you know, with science and not just the Bible? You know, if you're going to support young Earth creationism, that's fine. If you're going to support evolution, that's fine. But don't use the Bible as a source, because not everybody believes that. We got to speak the language that everybody speaks scientifically. But the biology teacher was not the same way. Everybody had to support creationism. The Bible was totally fine to use as a source. And this is the science teacher saying this. The Bible is fine to use as a source. My goodness, you know. And again, I couldn't say anything for fear of losing my job. The other thing that got to me too was the Bible teacher, the 9th and 10th grade Bible teacher, was very much of kind of the same mindset that everybody has to believe the same way, and teaching kids the right way to think and the right way to believe. I had tried to reach out and kind of befriend this guy because he was a single guy, still lived with his parents, 30 plus years old. Which, side note, school did not pay very well. The school paid about 75% of the median salary in Indiana. I was making about maybe $28,000 a year. They told us it's a ministry to work there. You should feel blessed. You should feel lucky to be part of this. Anyone who was not married and on a double salary had to work other jobs to make ends meet, and this guy was one of them. So my husband and I had him over for dinner one Sunday, and the very next week at school, he looked me in the eye and told me the reason that I have to take medication for a condition that I have is because I don't have enough faith. He also held discussions in front of me at a lunch table with the biology teacher about how women are hysterical. And I thought, my God, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. And I've become part of this. I've become complicit in this and teaching this to kids. And during the end of my last year there, I started thinking, like, I need to know if I need to leave. I want to be here, and I love the kids, and I want to be here and do right, but I don't feel comfortable. And I started praying, God, send me a sign. If I'm not supposed to be here, if I'm not supposed to be part of this, send me a sign. And oh boy, howdy, did I get a sign. Every year, Eagleton took part in something that they called Spiritual Emphasis Day. And it was a day that the kids got out of classes for a day, and attendance was mandatory. And it was, pretty much day-long church services and times of meditation and contemplation and scripture reading and things like that. Basically like an 8-hour-long church service. And for the last few years, they had been trying out an experiment where they would take the kids to a local park and just kind of let them roam free for a few hours. And the idea is that they would be by themselves in God's creation and spend time meditating on his word. And like, nobody ever did it. We caught a couple guys who had actually smuggled in fishing equipment and went fishing during that time, which good on them, by the way.
Yeah.
Because, I'm sure it was more productive and more enjoyable than, sitting there in nature for 3 hours trying to pray for that long. So spiritual emphasis day that year was a little bit different because after they knew they had to do something different, after catching those guys with the fishing equipment. That particular year, there was some kind of like a revival movement that had come to our town. And I forget the name of the movement, something like Rise Up Indiana or, Rise Up and Pray Indiana, something like that. But it was a church movement that was making the rounds. And the idea is that members of different churches from across the town would gather together and then hit the streets for street prayer and street evangelism. And so they decided for Spiritual Emphasis Day that we were going to take part in this. And zero training whatsoever, zero preparation. Instead, what happened was, they shuffled us together with a bunch of different church groups and put us into groups of 4 and sent us out into the town for 8 hours of street prayer and evangelism. And the annoying thing was that the town is a relatively small town. And the movement had been active in that town for several weeks already. Everybody had already heard it. And so I got, as a teacher, I was put as a leader of a group of 4 people. And we were just kind of shuffled out the door and said, all right, go evangelize, go pray. And I knew, as a teacher, I'm supposed to be like gung-ho for this. I'm supposed to set an example for the kids. But I was so uncomfortable. We went to a local Walmart, and the kids were like, all right, we're just going to go into Walmart and walk up to people and start praying for them. I said, no, we're going to ask. So we went up and we got a manager and we said, and I was so embarrassed, but I can't show that to these kids, And I said, do you mind if we walk around your store and pray for people? And they just looked at me as though, I'd sprouted horns, and they're like, no, leave. So we spent 8 hours kind of awkwardly wandering around. We can't go into places and pray for people, and it's dangerous. Like, it's 3 teenagers and, a teacher in her 20s, we can't just like walk up to people on the streets. It's dangerous,
Yeah.
And not to mention, everybody's already heard this. Nobody wants to be hassled by street preachers, and they took a day out of my oral book report week to do this. I'm still salty about that. It was ridiculous, and it was pointless, and it was humiliating. And we spent 8 hours just really awkwardly wandering around, and we ended up in the parking lot outside of like a liquor store, and the kids are all praying, oh Lord, please keep anybody from going in here today, and please forgive everybody who's sinning in there today. And I'm like, that's really depressing. I want to try and bring up the mood a little bit. And I said, Lord, if there's like a bottle of wine or something in here that's going to be used in the celebration, I pray that you're present in that celebration. If there's a wedding or something, please bless that marriage, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as that came out of my mouth, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. These kids are going to go home and say, Mrs. So-and-so said that it's okay, for people to drink at weddings, and it's going to be that guy all over again. And it's just, luckily that didn't happen. It just kind of slipped under the radar. But At the end of the day, the kids all kind of concentrated back at the school, and everybody was like, wow, it was such a great experience. It pushed me out of my comfort zone and yada, yada. They're like, Mrs. So-and-so, what did you think about it? And I had to lie through my teeth. What I really thought about it was that I hated it. It was uncomfortable, and it was useless and embarrassing. And I lied through my teeth to these kids, and I said, oh, it was really challenging, and I feel like I got a lot out of it, and yada yada. And that week, I returned next year's contract back to the school leadership and said, I can't do this anymore. I cited health reasons as my reason for leaving, but I said, I'm sorry, this is going to be my last year teaching here. I can't be part of this because, I had gone to that school hoping that it would be a way to worship God and to know God in this new kind of frame of reference that I was slowly starting to build. But instead, what I saw was just indoctrination, just more and more indoctrination that, that God is a God who keeps tally of your mistakes, that you are inherently broken, that it's okay to have a half-assed understanding of the world around you, that people who don't believe like you are different and other and to be shunned, that to be gay is to be wrong, that to be liberal is to be wrong, and I couldn't be a part of that anymore.
So, did you get your English degree from a Christian college as well?
I did not. I attended 1 year of a Christian college in undergrad, but it was really, really expensive. And when I realized that I wanted to pursue something in the realm of English and literature and writing, I thought I might as well go to a state school. If I don't need the Christian aspect of it, I don't want to spend $40,000 a year. I'm really embarrassed every time I tell this story, but during one of my first classes, and my sophomore year of undergrad was the first time in my life that I had ever attended any kind of class that was not explicitly Christian. And so in this literature, 101 kind of class, going around the room and introducing ourselves, and I very proud, because I knew I was supposed to do this. And I very proudly announced myself and said, my name is Claire, and I'm a Christian, and I'm happy to talk about the faith with anybody who's got questions, and yada, yada. And then I proudly looked around the room as though everyone was going to, come to me for the answer. And it was just this really awkward silence, and then everybody moved on. Yeah, everyone just moved on, and nobody talked to me, and nobody wanted to be my partner that quarter. So, I remember too the first time I ever heard a teacher swear in class. The teacher said, "Get the hell out of Dodge." And I looked around. I'm like, did anybody else hear that? Nobody else even cared.
How is the floor not opening up underneath him right now?
But I think more than the not necessarily Christian ideals that were being taught, it was the way that people reacted to it. I had always been taught that everybody who believes in evolution is an atheist, and to be atheist is to be angry, and to be atheist is to want to tear down the Christian establishment, to be combative and just bitter and angry. And I started to meet people who weren't like that. I made plenty of friends who were atheists who didn't give a care one way or the other. They knew I was Christian, still wanted to hang out with me, and they didn't protest outside churches or pray to Satan or anything. They just lived their own lives. I made my first gay friend, and again, I'd always been taught that that gay people make the choice to be gay, and that they that they hate God and that they're angry and that they want to go their own way and tear down normal Christian family values. And my gay friend wasn't like that at all. You know, he was just a normal guy who happened to have a different preference. It was no different than the way that I like pineapple on pizza and other people don't. It was no different than that. So to meet people who had different ideas and believed different ways, but were normal, and not just normal, but were nice and fun to be around. Mm-hmm. I think that was kind of the key that started to unlock this idea in my mind that, you know, if I let go of some of these beliefs that I know are harmful and I know are detrimental to my well-being, I'm not going to become an angry, bitter person. The choice is not be a fundamentalist Christian or be an angry, bitter person who wants to tear down all that is good and right in the world. The problem with fundamentalism is that they see everything in a binary. They see everything as black and white, good and evil, wrong and right, sinful and holy. There's no room for in between. There's no room for gray at all. And to see, you know, to go into a secular college and to see shades of gray for the first time and see the fact that it's more beautiful, you know, in a black and white photograph, in an Ansel Adams photograph, there's more detail because of the shades of gray. It's more beautiful because of the different hues that we see. And I think that was the thing that first started to clue me in that it's okay.
So I'm a straight married man, but I went to this high school, and I was raised Quaker, and then I left the school that I was in the middle of 8th grade. My parents took me out and put me into this other school, and I remember that they started to like hammer hell down like immediately, and it was just not anything that I'd ever experienced before. You know, being raised Quaker. I mean, like hell was something that existed, but it really didn't. It wasn't the main reason to be Christian or to believe in Jesus. You know, you believed in Jesus and you wanted to be like Jesus because Jesus is a great person to follow. That was what that was about. It wasn't about fear of hell. And I remember that there was this chapel that we had this one time where you know, it's exactly the way you described it. I loved the verbiage that you used, by the way, of shepherded and herded, you know, herded people into these areas. You know, they didn't lead them somewhere. They treated them like like cows or like sheep and got them in there so that they could you know, slam this information into their faces.
Exactly.
And this whole chapel this one time for like 40 minutes, this one pastor who was one of the teachers just hammered down this view that he has that if you're gay, you're going to hell. And it was shocking. You know, like I had gay friends. I was raised with just, you know, my parents' gay friends and everything, and it made zero sense to me, especially when you're talking about you know, my whole perspective of Jesus up until then was that, you know, the big takeaway that you should get from his life was that when he went to minister somewhere, if there were people that didn't believe what he was believing outdoors, he invited them in to be part of it. He didn't shun them further. He invited them in. And it sounds as though the schools that you both attended and where you taught very much had that shunning perspective, which I'm wondering where you are right now looking at Christianity as a whole, if the shunning is more accurate or the welcoming is actually biblically more accurate.
Man, it's tough because there's a movement that I've noticed recently in evangelical churches to cater more to the millennial crowd, you know, to become, you know, for lack of a better term, hip. I know I sound, you know, how do you do, fellow kids? But it's exactly it's exactly kind of the direction that a lot of churches are going in right now. But I still have a lot of family who attend Pawnee Baptist, and I check in and I look at their website from time to time, and they're definitely kind of following that same idea. We have to be younger, we have to be trendier, we have to get the millennials in, and millennials definitely have this ideology of being very open and welcoming of different ideas, of placing a lot of value on viewpoints that are not our own. And so I've noticed a lot of churches have this message of come as you are. This isn't really church. It's more like, coffee and a discussion. We welcome you. It doesn't, you don't have to be like us. Just come and hear, But what they do is very different than what they say. And again, having within just the last 4 years been a part of this Christian education system, where the churches say, we are welcoming, come as you are, you have value. The Christian education that is part of these churches is teaching that stay away from people who are different. Go to a Christian college if you can. Don't accept gay people for who they are. Gay people are making a choice, and that's very sad. You should pity them. Don't go out and have friends who aren't Christians, but keep in mind that it's your job to always witness to them. Pawnee had a saying when I was growing up that, every encounter is a divine appointment. In other words, anytime you met up with anyone anywhere, it was your responsibility to share the gospel. I had some embarrassing encounters during a family vacation where I was trying to witness to people on the airplane, at 15 years old, trying to witness to people in the hotel because I believed that, God brought me down to Florida with my family for a vacation for a reason, So, go ahead and have friends who are different. Just make sure that you try to make them like you. And it's definitely very exclusionary because people, especially Christians who fall short, are treated as other. I mentioned to you that, we had when I was growing up, we had some people who were caught having sex during, not during school, but during our school years. And, we had a girl a few years above me who became pregnant. She was expelled immediately. There was one of my students at Eagleton became pregnant after I left, and she was expelled immediately. That kind of a thing. A student at Pawnee Baptist a few years after she graduated came out as gay and was immediately shunned by her family. My best friend growing up, her older sister came out as a lesbian, and the whole family just refuses to talk to her or refuses to talk about it. Not a single person attended her wedding. I sent her a card, and I was the only person to do so. And that's why I've been very careful. At least I hope I've been careful enough to keep details about my identity kind of on the down low, because I haven't talked about this with my family yet, because they're all believers. And if it came out that I no longer believe the same way they do, I'm not even atheist. I'm agnostic. But if it came out, that I no longer believe the way that they do, the entire dynamic of my relationships to my family will shatter. If they ever find out that I now identify as bisexual, it'll just crumble, you know, my relationships with my family. And I know a lot of my Christian friends will never look at me the same way again. And it's tough, you know. That's why I've been very careful, you know, not to share where specifically I'm from, or, you know, not to share my last name, not to share my Reddit handle, just because I'm not ready. I'm not ready to take that step yet.
This concludes part 2. In the next episode, Claire and I discuss her current answers for the questions she once believed Christianity unequivocally had. We'll also talk about her current political views and how they've changed with her religious beliefs. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe, comment, review, and share. If you'd like to be interviewed for Out of the Fold, feel free to contact me on Twitter at OutFoldPodcast, or you can email me at outofthefoldpodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks once again to Claire and her husband for approving all of this conversation being shared. All production by me. Talk soon.